Chewbacca, Luke, and Princess Leia. They're the Star Wars Early Bird set of figures. These action figures are not yet available, but this Star Wars Early Bird certificate package is in stores. With this colorful Star Wars picture display stand and certificate to send in to get a set of figures by mail.
There was also a competition even back then with people. Everybody has somebody they know at a particular box retail store, or somebody they knew worked at a Toys R Us, and they would get the inside scoop, and they would still go in and buy those things, and they would sell them back then on Craigslist or something along those lines, and you'd have to fight those guys. And in this area, the Pacific Northwest, we have a really large group of Star Wars collectors, and we're all fighting each other for the very small amount of figures now that actually hit the shelves. And it does make it kind of sad. And yeah, I've gotten pretty good at pre-ordering and getting all these things online at retail, so I'm not overspending, but it's really not as much fun as it used to be.
Yeah, the thrill of the toy hunt, it's gone. And it was great. I miss it. Maybe the best part of collecting for me. It's kind of been taken away from us.
You know, you mentioned going to the different places. I mean, think about if your kid was the one that wanted the figures, even for like Christmas or even their birthday, and as a parent trying to track those suckers down. I know, Jeff, you mentioned that you take your daughter to Target quite often and you go in the toy aisle and there's nothing there. As a parent, I'd be absolutely furious. And you're having to go to 6 different stores to just fill out that run. Absolutely more frustrating for the parents as well. And that's why some of the kids don't play with the figures.
We hear that the kids today aren't into the action figures anymore. You know, they've got video games, they've got iPads, they've got all this other stuff. And I'm sure that is somewhat true, and it has a little bit to do with it. But if we go back to when Mandalorian came out at Christmas time, when a kid walked into a toy aisle, they'd just seen this show and all they wanted were toys from it. There was nothing there. With the sequel trilogy, as loved or hated as it was by people, if somebody walked into a toy aisle to find any kind of merchandise from one of those, there was none there. It doesn't matter if the kids want to play with them or not. They don't have the opportunity to buy them or to have their parents purchase them for Christmas or their birthday. So they move on. Right behind them is all the Transformers you can play with. Whatever other toy line is well stocked on both sides. There's a whole aisle of Legos that is 4 deep all the way down. So it's probably a little bit of both of Hasbro and the retailers on both ends. The big box retailers aren't ordering as much anymore. You know, around here with some of the new waves, they got 1 case per store. That is 2 figures each of a particular run of 8 figures. That's not enough. I mean, that's one, sharp toy collector comes in, buys the whole thing and walks out, and nobody gets a chance at it, especially with exclusives. When Revenge of the Sith came out, they had some great exclusives. Target had some really fun ones, and there were hundreds of them at each Target you went to. There was no problem getting those. And they just had an exclusive Mandalorian 6-inch figure with Grogu and the tram, and you couldn't find it at a Target anywhere. You couldn't buy it online. You couldn't find it in the store, but it was an exclusive. What's the point if it's not going to be available to anybody? I don't see why they would pay the tooling costs, why you would pay Hasbro all that money and not be able to redeem it on the other end.
I'm glad we mentioned the kids. That's a sore spot for me, since I have kids and they're going to play with action figures, not because I force them, but because they enjoy the shows. And my oldest already has. She's watched the Clone Wars, Rebels, The Mandalorian. If I actually saw 3 3/4 figures on pegs, I would buy them for her. She would take them home. She would rip them open and have the greatest time recreating adventures from the show, making up her own adventures. So all of you mentioned new Mando toys with enthusiasm. I'm curious, what other Star Wars toys are appealing to you? What toys are lackluster and failing?
The retro series is the only thing non-Mando kind of appealing to me, because it goes back to the original 3 3/4. So for me, that's my go-to. But The vintage series doesn't really necessarily do anything for me. I will say this. The vintage collection has now been around for 11 years, so there is quite a bit of stuff that's out there, which I do find pretty cool. But if I were to go back and buy something in the last 10 years, I'd probably go after the Rebels figures. I've got a few of those, but besides that, I'm trying to keep my costs down.
I am very excited for some of these things that have been coming out in the Black Series line. I was very happy that they did, and I know some of them were repacks, but they did make the Zeb figure. But the full run of the Rebels figures, Jackson the Rabbit, that also takes me back to my youth and the collecting the old Star Wars comics from Marvel back in the late 70s and early 80s. And I'm glad to see that a lot of the animated stuff is getting love. The Bad Batch figures are coming out. That makes me happy. The vintage collection has always made me happy. I don't have a lot of them. I try and stick to the things that I focus collector am into. But I have a few of them from, for example, Mandalorian, the Solo film, Rogue One, the media that I like. So the thing that gets me about the vintage collection that I find appealing, and the thing that totally suckered me into a lot of the anniversary packaging of the Black Series figures, is the throwback to the original Kenner packaging, the card backs, the old 6x9 card backs. And so the vintage collection being put on that stuff is, as a collector of a certain age, it hits me right in the feels, and I feel drawn to that. The stuff that doesn't work for me winds up being the things like the Action Fleet or Action Series or whatever it's called, or the Destiny whatever figures. Like, they had some interesting 5-inch sort of anime style figures that came out with that didn't really do it. I don't understand sometimes what Hasbro and what they're thinking and what they're trying to do. They say that they want to bring children into Star Wars, but the stuff that they're putting out for kids is for things that are not necessarily appealing to the kids. The whole, there's the Baby Yoda situation, right? The Baby Yoda Grogu character has brought more people into the Star Wars universe than a lot of other characters, right? In the last 20 years. But instead of focusing on that, and I know that they put out a bunch of plushies and talking Grogus and whatnot, but instead of focusing on that show, flooding the zone with Mandalorian stuff, we keep getting Finn and Rey, jetpack troopers from the Rise of Skywalker being put out in these other lines. And Hasbro is not, they're saying, oh, we got a new kids line of toys and it's clone troopers and Boba Fett. Okay, well, that's missing the mark. I mean, maybe Boba Fett, if you kind of tie it all back into the Mandalorian, but it's Empire Strikes Back Boba Fett. It's not Book of Boba Fett. So it doesn't feel like that there is any real market research going on at Hasbro when it comes to some of their toy making decisions. I know that in the past, Disney Lucasfilm has been very controlling of Hasbro and how they create and market and distribute toys, including case packing, etc. It's weird. It's like toy companies don't really make a lot of toys for kids anymore. And so either they should be making a ton of things for collectors, or they should be making that, and they should be making a ton of stuff that those people now can buy for their kids, and then we can get this sort of generational handoff of fandom and collecting. But I think that the execution of this whole plan is what's really what I'm unenthusiastic about when it comes to toys and Hasbro.
The thing I love now, I mean, and always have, is the 3 3/4. I love the vintage collection. I love the card backs. The art is fantastic. They improve. Hasbro has improved on all of their stuff. The face paint is, the sculpts are better. 3 3/4 came around by Kenner for one reason. It was world building. You had a scale of an action figure where you could world build around it, where, like David said, he flew that Millennium Falcon around his house on a different adventure every day. Like Jeff said, his kids could sit down and play and reenact the scenes from a movie or come up with their own creative storyline. That's what the 3 3/4 was made for. Ships, play sets. That's what I love about it. The fact that I can set it all up on a shelf and I can have it all go there. I like the 6-inch Black Series line. It's very nice. It's also really big and it takes up a lot of space. So I pick and choose the things with that particular line. The Mission Fleet that Sean was just talking about, which is Hasbro's kid-focused line right now, misses the mark all over the place. It is a weird size. They don't look great. Nobody's really buying this stuff. We're getting more content with Star Wars now than we ever have, and we are getting less Star Wars product to go with it. Cartoons, we have television shows, we have movies, and we have nothing on the shelves to get these kids even more excited about the next show that's coming out, the next big Star Wars thing. And it's kind of sad.
All of you belong to collector groups. How do they work? Are they enjoyable? Do they build community by bringing fans together?
Yeah, they definitely bring people together. I mean, I'll be honest with you. There was a time where I spent my evenings just at home hanging out with the kids, and it wasn't very healthy for me because I felt like I needed to be there 24/7. And my wife was the one who convinced me to find something for myself. So I ended up finding Rebel Scum online, and going through their forums, I found the Star Wars collecting group. I was pretty nervous about it, but the group that is here in Seattle is very welcoming and very understanding of your collecting habits and things like that. And I've been going for maybe 15 years. Yeah, collecting groups are awesome. I highly encourage them for other people.
It was 2015 before I really discovered a lot of the groups here in the Seattle Pacific Northwest area. And that's when I met some of these guys, where I met David's, where I met Sean's, where I met Jeff. And it is really kind of fun to get together and talk with people about the same passion. Go online, try to find one of those collector groups, try to see if you can hook up with them and talk to them. Like David said, they're real friendly. We help each other out. We're all collecting the same stuff. It's really been an enjoyable thing for me, and I've made really good friends, long-lasting friendships. And that's really one of the things that keeps me going in this hobby, is the passion that I can share with my friends.
I would agree with everything that has been said so far. I, like JR said, kind of an awkward hobby, I guess. Collectors of action figures, people who have families and careers, and they're at an age when we should all be sitting around talking about retirement and healthcare, and we're chasing down plastic spacemen. So it's nice to find other people that say, hey, that's okay. And I came to them very recently, and like everybody said, the groups have produced a number of friendships that are highly valuable and long lasting, and that to me is even more important than the toy aspect of it. David and I knew each other when we were in kindergarten and grade school, and then our lives carried us on different paths and we lost touch with one another, and we actually reunited through a toy group. So it's beyond the toys, but the toys are sort of the common ground that brings all of that together. I will also say, even though I have a mostly positive view of these things, sometimes the collecting communities can be difficult, depending on the people who are in them, the type of collecting that they do. As with all human institutions, they are made up of humans, and we have to deal with other humans. So and you find this more online than you actually do with the in-person groups. When people get together and they're face-to-face and interacting with one another in real time, it's much more pleasant and much more cordial. But you get the keyboard warriors out there, and it's interesting. There can be some judgment. There can be some gatekeeping that goes on, and this is with all clubs. It's not just Star Wars toy clubs. I mean, I've seen this in sports fan groups and other things, book clubs. I mean, come on, it's everywhere. But if you can avoid that, or if you encounter that on a minimal level, being a part of a collector's group, it can be highly rewarding. So I would say that if you aren't in a club and if you like toys, you should probably go find one.
Well, I'll never forget my first meeting. The first, say, 30 minutes of the meeting did not go well for me. I ended up at the end of a table with some of the heavier hitters. Yeah. And I am not a diehard collector. we opened a conversation, but then as soon as I made known that I dabble, I like this, I like that, the conversation came to an end. So I'm sitting at the end of the table and I'm thinking, hit the road. But no, it's those guys left and I met all of you. And I'm thankful.
JR, you shouldn't have been so mean to him.
It was not JR. Just guys who were so into collecting that the thought of having a conversation with a novice, a non-collector, or a guy who was just starting was distasteful. But the point is, it's not about those guys. It's about you guys and how my dedication to Star Wars, my level of fandom, my commitment to Star Wars has risen drastically since that time. It was a renaissance. So becoming part of this group, the return to Star Wars has been terrific.
Well, I found the group at one of the Midnight Madness events at Toys R Us. It was one of the big toy releases, and there was a bunch of people in line, and I showed up a little bit later, so I had to go back towards the end of the line, and I was talking to some guys, and they were talking about meeting up and toys and action figures and movies and collecting all together. They asked me if I'd ever heard about it, and I said nope. They invited me, and at the time, my job didn't allow me to meet on the night that we normally meet. So it actually took another almost year after that before I was able to make my first meeting. And, oddly enough, I kind of found myself in the same situation that Jeff was in. I sat next to the wrong person. And I also was like, well, this isn't as exciting as I thought it was going to be. David actually looked over and introduced himself. And 3 or 4 hours later, I realized I should probably go home. I had to get up and go to work in the morning. And that's how I first met David. And I'd been a regular ever since.
What would you like to see in the future?
Bo-Katan, Lobot, Pong Kill, a Grand Inquisitor, Velkin, Gar Saxon, Palpatine from the last movie, Casca, Fennec, the new Ahsoka, a good Cad Bane, the new Dark Trooper. I mean, where do you want me to start? I mean, these are things from these movies I would love. From the original, the Tonica sisters would round out the cantina scene. Quill or Mayfield, we haven't gotten with those. The repainted armor Boba Fett. I'd love to have a Dryden Voss to go with that stuff. We don't have a General Merrick, Blue Leader. I always like Hasbro to make a decision and be dedicated to 3 3/4 line. It's obvious that Black Series is their focus. It's what makes them the most money. So from a business standpoint, I understand that. So down the road, that's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see them continue it. I hope it doesn't die. I hope that we can have this conversation again in a few years and continue to talk about how our collections have grown and we've continued our friendships and had all this much fun, and maybe our children will love it as much as we do.
It's interesting, though, that Jared says that, because the vintage collection, right? They're at like 200 figures now, or right around 200 figures in that collection. And there's still something like 20 of the original Kenner Star Wars figures that they haven't put out yet.
The original 96.
Yeah, the original 96. There's still like 20 of them. And so you put out 200 figures. You put out 130 figures that are not original vintage Kenner, and you call it the vintage collection. But there's a ton of stuff that I would like to see. I mean, like, for example, the 3 3/4 Rebels run as the vintage collection, the higher articulation, the better sculpt, better paint. I'd like to see them continue the 6-inch run of Rebels. I want to see more of the Mandalorian stuff in 6-inch and in vintage collection. Like you say, some of the side characters. Again, we talk about the late 90s and the early 2000s of the toy production from Hasbro for Star Wars. We got at some point pretty much every background character. There's very few characters from any of the cinematic releases that we haven't seen at some point in some form, whether it's a Power of the Force 2 or a vintage collection or some other kind of 3 3/4 whatever. But there's so many background characters from Mandalorian, 3 versions of Boba Fett, the Marshall guy,
Top of Anth.
So like him and the frog folks. I want to see the Mon Calamari guy in the blue sweater. I want all of these characters from the show. And there's a very cynical view and when it comes to producing these toys, and it seems like we're getting a lot of repaints. I mean, we're on our 47th iteration of Boba Fett in the vintage collection, and we still don't have him in his new outfit from The Mandalorian. The Boba Fetts that have been released recently in the Black Series line are still Empire Strikes Back Boba Fetts. The continued repackaging, repainting, redistribution of the same old stuff. And I understand that there is a calculation that gets made that Boba Fett will probably always sell over the Frog Lady, but there's still collectors who want to see that stuff. That's what I would like to see. And I think that it's also cool in the Black Series line, digging into the legend stuff, Marvel Comics and other novels and video games and stuff like that. And I like to continue to see more of that because that's fun and unique stuff. And it services a larger swath of the fandom, and it brings more people into the toy collecting than it excludes.
I want a blurg. I know they've got it in the other series, but I don't think it works with the 3 3/4. So I want a blurg. So since we're talking blurgs, I want my Ewok Adventures, Star Cruiser Crash Crash, and I want Caravan of Courage. All those figures, like Sean was mentioning, something that we haven't had. Give me some of that. That's what I'm looking for.
JR, that's interesting. You're talking about earlier about the box sets that they made for San Diego Comic-Con. And when we've talked about the HasLab situation and the crowdfunding aspect of toy creation, maybe the way that Hasbro can strike the balance between mass producing toys for retail and servicing the hardcore collector is maybe they do a HasLab deal where they put together one of those box sets of figures, and they do like a 3 3/4 vintage collection style box set, and they do like a Mandalorian season 2 box set, and it has all of those characters that we love in there, or they do the Solo Dryden Voss's ship set where it's all the frog singing and the whatever, like all that stuff, right? Do all that, all the different characters that we haven't seen yet. Do that for Rogue One. You give me a box set of Blue Squadron pilots, I will fight you to get that. I mean, I will pay for that. Right now, I am customizing vintage Luke Skywalker X-Wing pilot figures to look like the members of Blue Squadron because there aren't any figures. That kind of stuff, I mean, Hasbro understands they can sell 20,000 units of a $400 spaceship that they blow up at the beginning of the second season of a TV show. They should be able to come up with a 4 or 5 pack of good figures that haven't been made before that they can put together in a fun way. And if you can show that to people and say, look, this is what we're thinking, this is the box set we're going to come up with, and then gauge the interest, throw it out there, see how many people pre-order it, and if it meets the minimum requirement for production, then roll with it.
John, they've done those things too. All of the comic packs, remember those? Where they did some of the things from the Knights of the Old Republic, and those are some of the most expensive things on the secondary market that you can buy in 3 3/4 today. I mean, they rival the price of a 1978 vintage collection figure. So there's plenty of stuff out there they could do, whether it's an online subscription service where you pay whatever it is a month and you get all these figures, or if they want to go the HasLab route. And I love your idea of building those things, building up a pack of 4 or 5 figures and putting them in something and individually carding all of them and selling them. It's fantastic. You couldn't get me to spend my money fast enough.
The fans will speak with their money. The collectors will speak with their money. They'll get behind that. All of those bundles you mentioned would hit their targets. I can say that without a doubt.
As the only person on this podcast today who's actually had an action figure made of them, is there anything you're looking forward to?
Well, clearly we need every iteration of an Imperial Navy trooper immediately.
Well, I have a second one ready for you. So
Oh, nice.
we'll get they get the vintage collection one on card for you. So you have a vintage Jeff Trooper. Then we'll have the vintage collection, modern re-release, high articulation and sculpt Jeff Trooper.
Well,
I want the carbonized card.
Since my focus is Black Series Imperials, I won't bore the audience with it, but I've got a list of missing figures. If you go back to the Kenner days, these are Imperials they just haven't made in the Black Series. And at this point, I'd settle for them in the Archive series. I mean, anything. Just make them. Fill in some of those missing Imperials. I love what you're saying about Legends, and I've had a soft spot for the prequels recently. For the anniversary of The Phantom Menace and coming up on the anniversary of Attack of the Clones. Fill in the missing pieces. Complete those scenes with figures that you never made. Our discussion of toy collecting has come to an end. Thank you, David.
I love figures, especially at 3 3/4.
Thank you, Sean.
I have spoken.
Thank you, JR.
This will be a day long remembered.
Galactic Initiative is not authorized or endorsed by Lucasfilm Limited. The name Star Wars and all related materials are registered trademarks of Lucasfilm Limited, a subsidiary of the Walt Disney Company, all rights reserved. Galactic Initiative is a registered trademark, and other product and company names are trademarks of their respective holders. Use does not imply affiliation or endorsement.